Okay, so today's class is about endoscopy in gynecology. So endoscopy is otherwise known as minimally invasive surgery or minimal access surgery. Self-explanatory terms, right? Okay, so historically, if you see, it was Philip Bosini in 1805 who visualized the interior of urethra with a tube and candlelight. That was the first sort of endoscopy that was done. In 1869, cystoscope was used as hysteroscope to evaluate abnormal uterine bleeding. That was in Ireland by a guy named Pantaleone. So as you can see, like, the entire idea of endoscopy started developing with urology and gynecology. In 1910, cystoscope was first introduced in the peritoneal cavity. So that was the first laparoscopy that was done in Sweden. And in 1989, the first laparoscopic hysterectomy was done by Rick et al. So what are the advantages of laparoscopy? As you know, rapid postoperative recovery, less pain in need of postoperative analgesia, shorter hospital stay and reduced cost, quicker resumption of normal activities, and also there are some real benefits like, clinically if you see there will be less adhesion. So if you go in for a surgery the next time, you can see that the adhesions will be lesser if the person has had a laparoscopy as opposed to an open surgery, second time if you're doing a surgery. And also the cosmetic advantage of a minimal scar. So these are all the advantages, like, when you are learning the advantages, you have to think about if someone approaches you and asks you about what are the advantages, like, you might be sitting in the OPD as a house surgeon, or somebody is coming in asking about the advantages of laparoscopy, you should be able to tell that. So try to learn it that way. Now, disadvantages are that the operation time may be longer, risk of iatrogenic complications are more, and the initial expenditure of buying the equipments, obviously compared to a normal open surgery, what equipments you need? You need only the OT table, and you need the staff, and you need the whatever instruments that we use, whereas here you need a whole variety of big equipments. And also the need for special training. Okay, so these are the disadvantages of laparoscopy, but these are mainly like, it's all related to the hospital related. So those things have to be tackled at the hospital level. The basic instruments that are used in laparoscopy, as you all know, a telescope. Okay, then the varus needle for creating the pneumoperitoneum. Telescope is for visualizing the cavity, peritoneal cavity or uterine cavity or whatever it is, and the trocar and cannula. So, for in case of, since we need to create a port, we need a trocar and cannula for that. Then the light source is required. Insufflator is to insufflate with what? Carbon dioxide usually we use, right? We need the carbon dioxide. And also the cameras and the video monitor and everything that is associated with that. The ancillary instruments are like, depending on each situation where you might need scissors sometimes. If you need to pick up a tissue, you need a grasping forceps probably. Then there are probes. Probes are just blunt instruments which can just be used to, just move the tissue from one place to the without grasping it. That is probe. You just probe it and push it away a little bit here and there. There's an aspirator and irrigator which is required because especially you need to, if there's bleeding or if there is a cyst which is ruptured or whatever, you need to suck out the contents and you need to see it properly. So there is an aspirator and irrigator. And the Moslator. Now, Moslator is something that is used, I think, entirely in gynecology only. Moslator is used to reduce the size. If it's a fibroid, to reduce the size of the fibroid and take it out in bits and pieces. So you can do the moslation inside the peritoneal cavity itself and take it out. Or within a bag. Sometimes, they ask for you do it inside the endo bag. Retrieve the specimen within an endo bag and do the moslation within that. That is also possible. And retrieve it piece by piece. So if it's a big, huge uterus, you cannot obviously take it out through the small incisions that you're making, right? 5 centimeter incisions that you're making. 5 centimeter, like the smallest even if you want to retrieve it through the specimen, even if you've done the hysterectomy, you cannot be making a 10-12 centimeter big incision to retrieve a specimen. And the whole idea of your surgery is lost, right? And also the uterine manipulator. So this uterine manipulator, many of you might have seen it. We put it in through the cervix. The manipulator is kept in through. And it is a metal rod like thing which is used to manipulate the uterus in which side. So you can manipulate it and stretch it to one side so that you can access the organs, that is a tube and ovary on the other side. And also to, when you are doing hysterectomy, to get the tension when you are cutting the side structures. Now coming to hemostasis during laparoscopic surgery. So hemostasis can be hemostasis, as you know, like even in laparotomy we have monopolar electrosurgery and bipolar electrosurgery. Monopolar electrosurgery is where the electrons are pushed from generator to the contact tissue through the active electrode and then returns back to the generator through the neutral electrode after passing through the patient. So that is, the problem is unwanted burns may occur. So that is a scary thing about monopolar electrosurgery. Now bipolar electrosurgery, the current flows from the generator between the two tips of the instrument, whichever one you are using, forceps or scissors. So the damage to tissue is more precise. So the electricity only flows between the tips of the instrument, particular instrument that you are using. So damage is much less. Now coming to other methods of hemostasis, you have the laser, which can be carbon dioxide KTP 532, or neodymium yttrium aluminum garnet, that is the Nd:YAG lasers, it can be used. Also other methods like for hemostasis are sutures. You can put sutures, either do intracorporeal, extracorporeal suturing, and you can write the knot in and tie it. Or mechanical clips can be used, or staples can be used. So these are all methods. These are not non-coagulatory methods, right? You're not doing any coagulation there. This is just to stop the bleeding. Now indications can be diagnostic or therapeutic. Okay, so diagnostic laparoscopy is used to visualize the pelvic structures of the uterus, pelvic structures like the uterus, the right and left adnexon, structures in the right and left iliac fossa, and the pouch of Douglas. This is generally the use in gynecology. And to know the tubal patency, there is a Crom perturbation. So that is usually done by putting in methylene blue. So where do you put the methylene blue through? To know the tubal patency, what is the idea? You have to put in a cannula through the cervix and inject methylene blue through the cervix into the uterine cavity. So it comes into the uterine cavity and it goes out of the tubes and enters the peritoneal spill. So you can see the peritoneal spill on either side. So that is how you check the tubal patency. So the dye that you use is methylene blue. And also ovarian, if it is an ovarian, you're suspecting something, then you can do an ovarian biopsy if you're not planning to do a surgery as such. And also for second look surgery. Where do you get the second look surgery? Is generally after, in oncology. Okay, after doing a surgery, after doing chemo and all that, you're not planning to go in to do a therapeutic laparoscopy or operative laparoscopy. You just want to see what is happening inside. Then you might go in for a second look surgery. That's a second look laparoscopy. That's in malignancies. Now, therapeutic indications, like if it is something to relate to the tube. So, what are the therapeutic things that you can do to the tube? You can do tubal ligation, that is your sterilization, right? That is the interval sterilization that you do, preferably after 6 weeks to 3 months only we will do that. And that is, you would have definitely seen this procedure. Then in case of ectopic pregnancy, salpingectomy can be done. Salpingectomy is what? Division of the tube. So tube is divided and cut and taken off. Salpingostomy can be done in certain cases of fimbrial block. So when you want to salvage the tube, though it may or may not be very useful, but in case you want to salvage the tube, you can do salpingostomy. Is when you put in a nick over the tube, nick over the anti-mesenteric border of the tube, and you can expel whatever, if there is a content inside there, you can expel it, or maybe it's a collection, or even in ectopic sometimes we do salpingostomy. If there is no other way, that's the only tube that is left, and you have to leave some hope for her to conceive naturally, you might be leaving the tube. Okay, then ovarian surgery, where all can you use laparoscopy? Anything, like everything that we do by laparotomy, you can do by laparoscopy also, right? So oophorectomy, any cases. Ovarian drilling, where do you do ovarian drilling? It is done in polycystic ovarian disease, right? Ovarian drilling, that is you just drill and you create some multiple punctures in the polycystic ovary and let out the contents. Okay, so that will help with the anovulation. It will help the patient to further ovulate. And also cystectomy, it's an ovarian cyst, right, to remove just the cyst. Oophorectomy is removing the entire ovary. Cystectomy is just removing the ovarian cyst. Now coming to therapeutic procedures in the infertility, infertility, where can you use laparoscopy? For fimbrioplasty, you can try doing a salpingostomy or fimbrioplasty. Also adhesive lysis is important. So infertility can be due to what all? Infertility may be due to maybe a previous surgery or previous infection or previous endometriosis and all that has caused some little bit of adhesions here and there. So that adhesions, if you clear, you might be able to offer her a natural conception rather than going for an IVF. So if everything else fails, these are all tubal factors in infertility, where you need to do a procedure like fibroplasty, salpingostomy, and adhesive lysis. It may not be fully effective, but it is probably you are trying to give her a chance at natural conception. Then comes endometriosis. Now, in endometriosis, what are the therapeutic procedures you can do? So, endometriosis, as you all have learned, what the picture is. You can imagine endometriosis, what can happen from. It can be just small lesions on the surface of the ovary tubes and the uterus in the POD and all that. Two, it can be vast adhesions. It can be really bad adhesions. Thick, dense adhesions can form due to that is in the last stages of the endometriosis. And in between, of course, you know about chocolate cysts also, right? Sometimes it might just form a chocolate cyst with not much of adhesion. It might be just involving the ovary also. So if it is an endometrioma, which is a cyst in the ovary, you can do a cystectomy. Plus whatever adhesions are there, you can try to remove that. So that is how it can be used in endometriosis. And also in other situations like laparoscopy can help in pelvic floor repair, caldoplasty, enteroceal repair. All this is creating the caldoplasty is the pouch of Douglas. So if there is adhesions, you can remove all that. And vault suspension. This is in case of prolapse. If you go back to prolapse, you will remember that where do you need to do vault suspension, where do you get vault prolapse is many years after surgery. Maybe hysterectomy done for prolapse or hysterectomy done for some other cause, but the vault might descend after a few years after surgery. So then the vault needs to be suspended. So that is vault suspension can be done using a laparoscopy also, and also paravaginal repair. Okay, so these are all highly specialized laparoscopic procedures that you get to do. And of course, in nowadays, even in malignancies, there is you can do node sampling, all these pelvic lymph node dissection, everything can be done by, to a large extent, things can be, even malignant diseases can be handled by laparoscopy. Now coming to the equipment and technique, so there is patient positioning and the operating room organization. So that is, the patient is positioned in the lithotomy position with, on the stirrups. Operating room is organization is, it talks about where the monitor should be, where the surgeon should stand, where the assistant should stand, where the anesthetist is, all those things. Okay, so that is how the operating room is organized. And then comes the peritoneal access. So operating room organization is, it should be visible to, the monitor should be visible to, if there is only one monitor, it should ideally be visible to both the surgeon and the assistant. And there's one more assistant sitting at the perineal end, but that person may not be able to see because depending on how the monitor is placed. Then peritoneal access, right? You need to enter the peritoneum. So how old can you enter the peritoneum? Sometimes you might just do an open laparoscopy. Sometimes you might just, you can access it with a pneumoperitoneum, create a pneumoperitoneum, go with various needle, create a pneumoperitoneum, and then go with the trocar and cannula. The other method is to slowly create the access to the peritoneum and go in with the trocar and cannula directly without creating a pneumoperitoneum. Okay, then visualization. So that is about the camera and the telescope and all that. Then that involves a manipulation. Once you visualize, you're inside the peritoneal cavity, you have visualized the organs, what is the pathology, then it's about manipulation of tissue and fluid. So that will need all the instruments that we talked about, the graspers, the probes, the irrigation, all those things. Then cutting hemostasis and tissue fastening. So if you're removing some tissue, you need scissors to cut. Hemostasis, we talked about what all are the methods that we can use, the electrosurgical methods and the other methods, and tissue fastening. Okay, that is, you might be required to put some sutures and all that. Then tissue extraction. This again we talked about. We said how we will remove the tissue. So if it's a small tissue, we can put it in remove it through make one of the ports slightly bigger and remove it through that. Or we can put in an endo bag. There's something called an endo bag in which you put and you try to retrieve it. We talked about the Moss litter also, right? If it is a big lesion, if it's a big uterus as such, you can moslate it and remove it also. And the incision management. Obviously, you went in with an incision. Now you can't just leave it alone, especially the umbilical port that you're putting in usually, right? How do a primary port will be in the umbilicus, right? Generally in gynecology, the primary port will be in the umbilicus. So that port at least will be at least 10 millimeter to 11, 12 millimeters. So that has to be sutured from the rectus sheath onwards. And if you made your incisions bigger to retrieve any of the specimens, then that port also has to be managed surgically, has to be sutured basically. Okay. Now laparoscopic procedure is basically where it is the incision, there is midline infraumbilical incision, and the abdominal wall is lifted. That is, and then the insufflation needle or the Veress needle is introduced. So this abdominal wall is lifted so that you don't go and accidentally hit the organs, intraperitoneal organs or the aorta. And the creation of the pneumoperitoneum with carbon dioxide, and then you check the needle position in the peritoneal cavity. Intraperitoneal pressure is 20 to 25 millimeters. You put in the trocar and cannula, and once you start the surgery, you try to maintain it between around 12 millimeters only. You don't want the high pressure in the peritoneal cavity throughout the length of your surgery. And the laparoscope is inserted with the camera after white balancing. You remember that thing? You do that white balancing to make sure that the camera is clear, the focus and clear. And ancillary ports. Once you've done that much, then you go for the ancillary ports. So first port we put is usually the infraumbilical incision, and the other ports will come on the either side. And maintaining of peritoneal distension by same carbon dioxide insufflation. So it's a continuous supply, and it makes sure that it is kept at 10 to 12 millimeters. So that is your whole unit, laparoscopy unit with the monitor and all the other camera and all those things. So these are the disposable trocars of various sizes. This is the ones through which you enter the peritoneal cavity. So depending on the size of the instrument, can be from 12 millimeter to 2.7 millimeter. There can be various diameters. These are some of the laparoscope, the degree, the three types of, you can see the length, it's not the length, you can see the width of the laparoscope is also smaller, different, depending on, we talked about the ports, right? It can be different sizes, and also the degree. Laparoscope, this is a 0 degree laparoscope, okay, 2 millimeter, 5 millimeter and 10 millimeter. So the degree is basically the this area where you can see this is 0 degree, this is just directly pointing out, there is no beveled thing like this. So it will be like direct, you can see like this only. Sometimes if you have like an angle like this, it is a different kind of field of vision that you get. Okay. Now these are the graspers. There are different kinds of graspers. You can see this, all different types in the blunt and different types like blunt, and some of them might be serrated. All those kinds of manipulators and graspers are there in this. This one is a probe. You can see it's a blunt instrument. It's a probe. It doesn't grasp anything. You just introduce it. It's like a rod. You just introduce it and you just push the tissue away with that. Now, when you come to the complications, anesthesia complications can be hypoventilation, esophageal intubation, gastroesophageal reflux, bronchospasm, hypotension due to the venous return secondary to the high intraperitoneal pressure is less. So the hypotension might occur. Then the GI-related narcotic overdose. There can be carbon dioxide embolus because carbon dioxide is what you're insufflating, and cardiac arrhythmias can occur due to hypercarbia and acidemia, also cardiac arrest. So these are the complications due to anesthesia. Surgically, you can have due to the insufflation at the insufflation point. If you're not insufflated, if it has gone extraperitoneally, you can get emphysema. It can even go into the chest and create an emphysema. Electrosurgical complications like because especially monopolar current, there can be thermal visceral injury and current diversions. Okay, so it is not like only the point that you see it will be. There is a lot of capacitance and things like that, coupling and all those things. So there can be current diversions also occurring. So you have to be careful. Then hemorrhagic complications, which is especially if you go and accidentally hit any of the great vessels like aorta, common iliac, internal external iliac vessels and their branches, and also the abdominal wall vessels. This is also very important, right? You can, when you are introducing the port, even if you have not gone in and into the peritoneal cavity and hit something, if there is something on the abdominal wall and you go and in through that, it can create a big hematoma. Especially these arteries, you should be trying to avoid, like a superficial circumflex iliac vessels, superficial inferior epigastric vessels, deep inferior epigastric iliac vessels, and the deep circumflex iliac vessels. Other complications, as you can imagine, what all organs are there. We talked about the vessels. We talked about the vessels, the retroperitoneal vessels. We talked about the abdominal wall vessels. Then gastrointestinal injury can occur to stomach, small bowel, colon, anything. Urologic injury can occur to the bladder, the ureter, especially the ureter, right? Always the ureter and the bladder because it's very close relation to the uterus. So if you're doing a hysterectomy, there is a chance. And also neurological injuries due to poor positioning or pressure on surgical dissection. So it can cause, like, the shoulder and all is not positioned properly. Patient can have paresis. It can be there. And later on you can have infections, incisional hernia and wound dehiscence as in any other surgical procedure. Now we come to hysteroscopy. So hysteroscopy where you use is mainly what do you need? Hysteroscopy. We need to know what is the inside of the uterus, right? We need to know. Now we are trying just seeing what is the pathology in the uterus. So what is the pathology in the uterus which will require you to do a hysteroscopy? Generally, what are the causes of AUV? So you can have post-pregnancy metrorrhagia, some endometrial hyperplasia, submucous fibroid causing a bleeding, endometrial polyps, foreign body. Or usually, what is the most common foreign body seen in the uterus? It is a copper T with the thread which is broken off and you are not able to retrieve it through a blunt curettage. Then you might have to go in for a hysteroscopic removal. Okay, that's a foreign body usually. That's a lost IUCD. Okay. Then endometrial atrophy and endometrial cancer. So these are all the conditions that can cause abnormal uterine bleeding. So you can see in the hysteroscope how we can look. You can see the endometrial thickness is increased in the first picture. Second one, you can see cystic glandular formations. This is the inside of the macroscopic view of the inside of the endometrium. Now the indications for hysteroscopy, like we said, is unexplained abnormal uterine bleeding. Can be in any of the age groups, reproductive, premenopause or postmenopause, and selected infertility cases. So infertility, if there is an abnormal hysterography or transvaginal ultrasonography and you want to go in and see if it is something you can correct, you can really identify and correct using your hysteroscopy, then you can go. Then unexplained infertility and Asherman syndrome. Now Asherman syndrome is what you get, intrauterine adhesions, right? Generally due to maybe repeated DNCs, repeated trauma to the endometrium, or it can be due to tuberculosis. Okay, so that is Asherman syndrome. Then recurrent spontaneous abortion. If you want to know, like, what is the cause, you're not able to pick it up on anything. Maybe there's a small submucous polyp, or endometrial polyp or fibroid polyp or something like that, or maybe there is a septum which we can remove. Okay, so that in case of recurrent spontaneous abortion, you might have to go in for a hysteroscopy if you don't find any other reason for the abortions. Then congenital uterine abnormality, so that is in case of bicornuate uterus, subseptate, septate, uterine dialysis, etc. You might be able to devise some procedures using the hysteroscope as well. Okay. So the operative procedures that are generally done is endometrial biopsy. We're talking about endometrium till now. So endometrial biopsy, which is site specific, we can look at and we can identify suspicious area and take a biopsy from that. Foreign body removal. Dissection of, if there's a septum, we talked about that, right? If there's a septum, you can remove that. That is a cause for infertility or recurrent pregnancy. You can remove the septum. Endometrial polyp removal, myomectomy of submucous fibroid, endometrial ablation. Ablation is another procedure. We will come to that. Then transcervical tubal catheterization, sterilization. These are all sterilization are not done now. These are all procedures that were described, that can be done, but it's not in vogue because we have other methods to do sterilization. So this is one of the methods that they had come up with, where you plug in the tubes, using going with a hysteroscope and go to the conva. You find the beginning of the tube and you plug the conva so that the sperm cannot enter the fallopian tube. So that was one of the methods, but it's not used now. And also adhesive lysis in uterine synechia. Now, contraindications obviously would be if there's an infection in the uterus, you will not go in and spread it, right? You will not go in with a hysteroscope and let it go into the peritoneal cavity because you're pushing in something, right? You need distension media to see the endometrial cavity properly. So when you're building up the pressure, it is going to obviously spill over into the peritoneal cavity also. Pregnancy, obviously, then malignancies. Bleeding, if it is severe bleeding and you are not able to visualize anything, then there is no point, right? Cardiopulmonary disorders and cervical stenosis. So the patient positioning and cervical exposure, as you know, you need to position the patient in the lithotomy position and see the cervix properly, hold the cervix properly. Anesthesia, general anesthesia usually done. Cervical dilatation you need to do, right, in order to introduce a hysteroscope. So cervix has to be dilated, and then the uterine distension and imaging. and intrauterine manipulation is done. So this is the panoramic view of the uterine cavity. You can see as you enter the uterine cavity, that's the top you can see, and on either side you can see the beginning of the conua, the beginning of the tubes. That's a fundus as you see the top of the thing. Now, distension media can be carbon dioxide or fluid media. So, carbon dioxide is only used for diagnostic purposes. The problem is what there's some little bit of bleeding. If you try to do some therapeutic thing, obviously you're going to touch anywhere in the endometrium, it's going to bleed. And then once it bleeds, you need something to wash it away. So that is why you need distension media, fluid media for operative procedures. Since they allow continuous irrigation, giving a clear picture and enable the use of both mechanical and electrosurgical instruments. So these can be, depending on the osmolality, there are hypotonic electrolyte-free solutions like glycine, mannitol, sorbitol. But the problem is that, what is the problem? See, they don't contain electrolytes, so they don't contain electricity. So electrical, complications will be less. Electrosurgical complications will be less. But because they are hypotonic, they get absorbed also. So they can cause hyponatremic hypervolemia. And this can go on to bradycardia and hypertension and pulmonary edema, cardiovascular collapse center. So there is a danger of using a distension. So there is always you're only supposed to infuse this much. You're not supposed to go beyond a limit. You cannot just keep on irrigating and trying to visualize and do the procedure. There is a specific time period and fluid volume which you can use to complete a procedure. And bipolar electrosurgery is conducted in electrolyte containing solutions such as physiological saline. This medium reduces the risk of hypoosmolarity and hyponatremia with excessive fluid absorption, but does not eliminate the risk of congestive cardiac failure and pulmonary edema. Okay. So it basically the thing is distension media, overuse of it can cause hypoosmolarity and hypervolemia and the resultant complications. Now this is a normal appearance of the cervical canal. You can see all that rugy, ridges kind of appearance of the cervical canal. This is what you see as you go in with the hysteroscope. These are some of the lesions, pathology that you can see. This is the cervical canal polyp. You can see the cervical canal and the polyp there. And this is a fault. Sometimes when you introduce, that is why it is important to dilate the cervix. Sometimes if you are using force to introduce, you might create a false passage. That can happen even during dilatation and curettage also. If it is not an open cervix and you're trying to push in bluntly with your force, you might create a false passage and you might perforate the cervix of the uterus. Okay, so this is these are some other lesions like surface of a submucous myoma. This is all the diffuse superficial vascularization you can see. These are all the pictures that you can see in the hysteroscope. Okay, now coming to endometrial ablation, which is a procedure that we described. This was a procedure that was described in 1980 for destroying the endometrium in women with AUB. So what is the importance? It is very important when you're going in and doing an endometrial ablation. What are you planning to do? You're just planning to take off the endometrium because the endometrium is a surface that bleeds, right? So you plan to take off the endometrium, but you have to be very, very sure that there is no malignancy. Because if you're going to go and do this and do some endometrial ablation with the pathology malignancy there, what is going to happen is she's not going to bleed much and you're going to think she's normal, but that malignancy might sit there, will sit there and grow. So it is very important to rule out malignancy there. And what happens is when all the medical treatment has failed and you don't want to go ahead with a hysterectomy, probably you can try an endometrial ablation. You've tried all kinds of medical treatment. Is what? Medical treatment is with the progesterones, right? For AUB, progesterones. Then we talked about Mirena, you can try. Then the other option is patient is fed up with all the tablets and everything and she says, I'm just fed up, remove my uterus. So this is the other option. Instead of removing the uterus, you can go in for an endometrial ablation also. So that is if it is an AUB not responding to medical management and it is not pre-malignant or malignant and it's a recurrent hyperplasia without atypia, okay, and can be done under local anesthesia as well. So these are the how you do endometrial ablation with the hysteroscope. You can see this is a various instruments are used, loops and roller. It's a roller ball, okay. So loop is used. You can see it will just cut off the endometrium. It's similar to prostate also. If you've seen a prostate, how they do, they just shave it off with that loop. And the other one is the roller ball. So the roller ball will be like coagulation. It will be like you'll be keeping it on all the sides and you'll be coagulating the surface. That's the endometrium. Okay. So this is, you can see slices of endometrium being resected, and this is the resected endometrium. collected for sending off for the histological examination. Now, intraoperative complications here also, you can have trauma, hemorrhage, complications related to the distinction media that we talked about, infections can occur, then thermal damage caused by the electric current, and cervical or uterine perforation can also occur. Now we come to just few these things about the robotic surgery, right? So it's the most in thing. I mean, you might have learned it under surgery. You might have had a class on robotic surgery. So that is you can see the console where they sit console where the surgeon sits. Okay, and it's remotely done. Surgery is done remotely. So world's first surgical robot was in 1983. First robotic surgery was a cholecystectomy done in 1987. Then it's Da Vinci surgical robot had cleared the FDA. This is the history of all these things. Okay. Now the benefits is it's more precise and the range of motion is there is more range of motion. Okay, rather than compared to laparoscopy. Laparoscopy, what happens? You got these stick rigid instruments, right? They are just in one direction only. They are not pliable. It's not like your hands. You got so many movements of your wrist joints and all the joints with your hands when you do a open surgery. With laparoscopy, that is the limitation that you have. Okay, whereas the robotic surgery, they are improving in many ways. They're creating many joints in that way, so that you get a kind of like a more functions can be got with robotic surgery. Bleeding will be less. It's more comfortable for the surgeon because the surgeon can sit at a console. No need to stand and keep your hand here and held up holding the instruments. Can be done remotely. Disadvantages are the haptics. That is, you don't have the tactile sensation. You don't have. And the cost might be a myth because once you start it, it is almost comparable to laparoscopy. The cost might come up to. That depends, on the setup and on the patient turnover that we get. Then procedure time will be longer and it's a higher learning curve. Just like laparoscopy, it's a new procedure, so you have a learning curve for that. Commonly used in urology for prostatectomy, cardiac surgeries, and gynecology hysterectomy. Nowadays, even used a lot in all the malignancies. Okay, anything that is related to in general surgery, also now anything that is done by laparoscopy can be done with robotic surgery also. So it is virtually scarless and high patient satisfaction. That is single site robotic surgery where you have a single port. Even laparoscopy you can have a single port, but it's very cumbersome because through one port you're putting the telescope, all instruments, everything will be hitting each other. It will be very cumbersome. With laparoscope, with robotic surgery, as you can see, the instrument shaft is semi-rigid. So it can keep moving, everything is curved and they have some modifications and all that. Everything goes in through one single port. Okay, so you don't need ancillary ports for that. So that is the open surgery incision you can see. Multi-incision laparoscopy you can see. You get 3-4 incisions you get. That is for a cholecystectomy, what you're seeing in this picture. And then it comes to single site Da Vinci, you can see it's a single incision laparoscopy. This is the only scar you get. So that is the cosmetic advantage. Cosmetic advantage also means that much less of adhesions also. That's only one port through which you're entering. So adhesion formation is also less in these patients. So it has been approved for hysterectomy in 2013. Okay, now this is the assignment. So please submit it to the Google Classrooms. Okay, thank you.